Time now for our Friday Making a Difference report and the story of a man whose capacity for forgiveness is astonishing. He suffered the worst loss a parent can ever face, and yet he decided to turn his grief into something positive for himself and a troubled young man. Here's NBC's John Larson.
A documentary began the story like this.
14-year-old Tony Hicks shot and killed 20-year-old Azim Khamisa.
A 14-year-old murders a promising young college student for the cost of a pizza and becomes the youngest child in California history charged as an adult with murder and gets life in prison.
It was like a nuclear bomb going off in my heart.
Azim Khamisa, the father of the victim, buried his only son Tariq according to their Muslim custom. He climbed down into the muddy grave. It had been raining, and they lowered his son's body wrapped in a white cloth down into his open arms.
Yeah, I didn't want to live there alone. I stayed there a long time. When something bad happens, you can stop that bad from happening to other people.
But when he finally came up, he did something remarkable.
It is wrong to lie, to cheat.
First, he forgave the family of the killer.
It was a defining moment in my life.
Only through that forgiveness,
which in turn helped Azim start the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, speaking together to more than 1 million children about the real pain of violence.
And sometimes it scars the soul forever.
Then, Azim visited Tony Hicks, the killer, who had never had a father, and forgave him too.
His forgiveness wasn't something I expected.
Now Azim is lobbying to have Tony released from prison early, like he was his own son.
And when he gets out of prison, what do you hope for him?
We'll have a job for him at the foundation.
So you're going to hire him?
Absolutely.
This is the killer of your son?
Yes.
Tony says now he knows what a real father is.
I had a man forgive me for taking the life of his son.
And he will work for that father, and for many who maybe never had fathers, someday, whether he gets out early or not. John Larson, NBC News, San Diego, California.
Greetings and namaste. Namaste is a Sanskrit greeting. It's actually more than a greeting, it's also a prayer. It comes from my tradition. What it means is I honor the place in you in which the entire universe dwells. I honor the place in you that is of love, that is of truth, that is of beauty, and that is of peace. When you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are one. So as is evident from the video, mine is a personal story. So I'm going to speak to you from that place in me where we are one, and I invite you to listen to me from that place in you where we are also one. I remember writing in my journal, I'm an active writer, I've authored 5 books. I keep an active journal soon after I lost my only son. And I made this entry that there's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. But a broken heart is an open heart. If one can learn to live with an open heart, gentle transformations begin to manifest. And that has been true in my life. We are very quick to judge all the isms that we live through, and especially now when the country is so divided. I don't even remember, having lived here for 50 years, we were so divided. To judge, you have to close your heart. So part of my goal here is to open your hearts. Because an open heart can receive and transmit compassion, empathy, love, and forgiveness. It was through that open heart I was able to see that there were victims at both ends of the gun. Because my son was murdered by a 14-year-old. Who's the enemy here? Is it the 14-year-old? It was very random. Or is the societal forces that force many young men and women to fall to the crack and then choose lives of gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons? That is the real enemy. And how many kids do we lose in America? one every hour. We just went through Uvalde, Sandy Hook, Majority Park in Florida. I mean, these are ones that actually make the media. But we actually lose a young soul every hour. I didn't know all of this till I lost my son. And I asked the question, how did we get where children kill children? How did we build a society? We are the richest nation in the world, the only superpower. We can spend billions of dollars in wars on foreign soil, yet every single day here, right in our own backyards, our defenseless children are being wiped out in a frenzy of bizarre violence. It didn't make any sense to me, and I hope it doesn't make any sense to you either. So having learned these horrific statistics 9 months after he died, I created the Azim Khamisa Foundation to honor him, but also to take the problems of youth violence. I forgave my son's killer and reached out to his grandfather soon after founding the foundation. And the initial mandate of the foundation was to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence, by saving lives, empowering the right choices so they don't fall to the crack and get involved with gangs and crimes and weapons, and to teach the principles of nonviolence, of accountability, of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness, of peace building. The foundation is in its 27th year. We've reached 2 million kids. And not only are these important virtues teachable, our children are hungry for me. And I still remember when I reached out to the grandfather of my son's killer. I told him, I'm not here screaming revenge and hatred and retribution because your grandson killed my son. Rather, I see we both lost a son. Tony, who took Tariq's life, lived with his grandfather and calls him daddy. I can't bring my son back from the dead. He's gone, and you can't do anything to get Tony out of prison. But the one thing we can do is to make sure other young people in our community don't end up dead like my son or end up in prison like your grandson. And this is the mission of the foundation. The real reason I'm here is to ask for your help. Will you help me? So he was very quick to take my hand of forgiveness. And here we are 27 years later, and we're still together. I would never have met him had his kid not killed my son. He's African American, he's Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm Eastern, and we are brothers. So this kind of underlines what restorative justice is. To understand restorative justice, you have to understand that the criminal code we got came from the early pilgrims. Most of them came from Europe, and most of them came from monarchy. So in a monarchy, the king or the queen owns both the land and the people. So there's a crime in Europe, it's always the king or the queen against the offender. We don't have monarchy in America, so the state takes that role. So in my tragedy, it was the state of California against Tony Hicks. RJ, restorative justice, which comes from the Aboriginal cultures of New Zealand and Australia, take a very different approach. What they say is crime happens in the context of community. And real justice is not done till 3 things happen. You have to make the victim whole. We can't bring Tariq back. He's gone. He's gone forever. But working with his grandfather, and now, a couple of years ago, Tony joined us, is meaningful to me and my family because less kids are ending up dead like Tariq or ending up in prison like Tony. That's meaningful. The second piece is to bring the offender back to society as a functioning and a contributing member. Well, I met Tony when he was 19 years old. It took me 5 years to come eyeball to eyeball with Tony. It's very hard to do, to come eyeball to eyeball with a kid who killed your son. But I recognized that my journey of forgiveness is not complete till I meet him. He was at the New Folsom prison, and I remember in that hour and a half I spent with him, at one point we locked eyeballs. I looked in his eyes, and he looked in my eyes, and we held that glance for what seemed like an uncomfortable time. I'm looking in his eyes to see if I could find a murderer. I didn't. I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity. That I got the spark in him was no different than the spark in whoever is watching this and me. I wasn't expecting that. He was polite, he was remorseful, he was well-mannered, and he was articulate, and did not portray any of the typical attitudes of a 19-year-old in our society. I wasn't expecting that. What I'm trying to tell you is he was a likable kid. I wasn't expecting that either. So at that point I told him, Tony, you know I've been working with your grandfather for over 4 years. And I want you to know when you come out of prison, you have a job at the Azim Khamisa Foundation. And you can come work with your grandfather and me. And that was a very transformative for him and me, because as I walked away from the prison, I remember that my stride was a lot bouncier leaving the prison than the one I walked in, like a big albatross that was lifted off my shoulders. Forgiveness can be very freeing. Hopefully this is a good message for you. And when you take forgiveness and add it to restorative justice, it's restorative justice on steroids. The next day, the grandfather calls me and says, you know, Azim, that meeting you had with Tony was very powerful. He would always tell me, Daddy, because he lived with his grandfather, I'm not going to make it in prison. I'm going to die in prison. But after you gave him some love and hope, he's 180 degrees turnaround. He passed his GED at A+, 90%. Self-taught himself, although he was 22. And finally, he went to parole in 2019. I was there. My daughter, who runs the Azim Khamisa Foundation, which I created in Tariq's memory, was also there advocating for Tony's release. And when the commissioner was in tears, he says, you know what, I've been doing the parole hearings the last 30 years. I've never, ever had a victim's father or a victim's sister advocating for the release of the offender. And you know what? Tony got parole. He was released. That never happens. And he's now volunteering for the foundation, just like his grandfather and I have done for over 27 years. And think about it. We just speak together. When he's on stage with me, he says, when I was 11, I joined a gang. When I was 14, I murdered Mr. Khamisa's son. I've spent the last umpteen years in prison. I wish I could turn the clock back. How many 11 years old in the audience? And we reach tens of thousands of kids every year through the foundation that are thinking about joining a gang will change their mind. Think about that. That's the amazing power of bringing Tony back, forgiving him, and making him a resource to help. We've saved him, but the more important thing is he's saving a lot of kids. Finally, by doing our programs in schools and forgiveness work that I do, that I teach to adults as well, and I speak at conferences, and now speaking together with Tony and his grandfather, is healing the community. So RJ is a much better, humane, compassionate way to provide fair and right justice. Because our criminal justice system doesn't work, it's broke. So what are the 3 principles of RJ? Make the victim whole, bring the offender back as a contributing, functioning member, and heal the community, because crime happens in the community. So this is what I think we can use in all kinds of conflict. I do this in management teams. Because there's people, there's conflict. You can do that with climate control, because we've offended Mother Earth. We can heal Mother Earth by making sure that we're always looking at these 3 things. Now we are victims and our world community is suffering. I've even saved some divorces using these principles. So take these principles to heart and try it in your own lives to make sure that you get more humane, compassionate, and peaceful results. Thank you very much, and namaste.